spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Alex Selsky. So Alex, tell us more about the ceasefire that's been declared. I mean, these escalations seem to happen around the time of the elections. Can we expect another 4 years before we see an escalation start up again?
No, it depends on the Palestinians, on terrorists of Hamas. All we want is quiet. And that was the goal of our operation, just to provide safety and stability, normal life to our citizens. And we really, really hope that it will be quiet. And the principle of the ceasefire is very simple. Quiet will be met with quiet. And if it will be violated, so Israel will react again intensively in order to provide peace and security to its citizens. That's all.
You were just on RT recently and you were asked about the proportionality of civilian casualties, but you didn't really answer the question. I wanted to see if you could answer it now. Do you think that the proportionality of civilians killed was justified, meaning 6 dead in Israel, 1 civilian, and 166 dead in Palestine, mostly civilians?
Well, Israel doesn't target civilians, and if we hurt civilians, we see failure in it. But you have to understand that Hamas militants, Hamas terrorists, they hide behind civilians. They fire rockets on our civilians from schools, from hospitals. They hide the rockets in hospitals and schools. We see that they fire rockets from apartments of buildings. So if we do not want civilians in Gaza to be hurt, we call upon civilians, and we do it before every strike. We call upon civilians that they will not be around the terrorists, that they will not let the terrorists to use them, to use their houses, to use their schools. So believe me, we do not hurt civilians, but Hamas target civilians. They see a victory in hurting civilians. We're really sorry for any casualty, but if Hamas doesn't want casualties in Gaza, stop firing rockets and stop hiding and using their own civilians.
But Alex, I mean, you say that you're targeting terrorists. How do you legitimize that statement when the democratically elected leadership is Hamas? I mean, wouldn't that make all public areas Hamas affiliated? Where are people supposed to go? To me, it seems like it's just a way to justify bombing any building in sight and say, well, they should have known better.
So why people let the terrorists use them? Why people let the terrorists use their houses for rockets and for firing? What do you want us to do? If tomorrow any terrorist will fire on your children from any house, what would you do? See, we call before every strike, I repeat, before every strike, we drop letters and we speak on the radio and we call upon civilians to get to leave the places that can be targeted. And that's what happens if the terrorists use the civilians. So if civilians don't want Hamas to use them, please not let them use them and not let the Hamas control Gaza if they really don't want to be hurt. That's the only reason. And let them pressure Hamas not to fire rockets on Israel and not use them for firing these rockets. We have to provide safety for our children, and we target only terrorists. But if civilians are around that didn't leave the place yet, we will do everything not to hurt them. But unfortunately, sometimes it happens because there are civilians that doesn't listen, or there are terrorists that just use them. We call upon everybody to stop firing rockets, and we call upon all the international community to pressure on Hamas not to use civilians.
Well, unfortunately, the international community is looking with condemnation at Israel, not necessarily Gaza right now, Alex. I mean, what do you think about the international condemnation, not just for killing so many civilians, dozens of children in this latest offensive, but for violating international law by continuing to build settlements and the blockade against Gaza?
Excuse me, why don't you condemn that Hamas fire rockets on our children. I didn't hear that now. There is no any kind of blockade on Gaza. We don't blockade Gaza, we just blockade the weapons getting into Gaza. Because these weapons then are being fired on us. Anything can be imported into Gaza if it's not weapon or any kind of material that can be created for weapons. People get inside to Gaza from Egypt. How can you call it blockade? There is no blockade for anything which is not weapon. So please stop the terror, and then nobody will be hurt. And when you're asking us to condemn what we condemn, and we see a failure when we hurt civilians. But I don't hear now you condemning that they fire rockets on our civilians. We have to provide peace to our children. Stop firing in us. Quiet will be met by quiet. As simple as that.
Okay, first of all, I do condemn the killing of any civilians, Alex, but when you're talking about how there's no blockade and that you only don't allow things that could be construed as weapons, I mean, things like wheelchairs, chocolate, toys, how could these things be considered weapons? And internal reports from your own government said that you wanted to put Palestinians on a diet to, refrain from having a humanitarian crisis. So when you hear things like that, it definitely leads the international community to believe in something else. But I wanted to specifically talk to you about media. You said that you've only targeted terrorists in Gaza. But as we know, last Sunday, the RT office, along with multiple other media organizations, were bombed. 2 days after this happened, you wrote a letter to Moscow's RT branch. Can you clear the air about what your intention was with this letter?
Well, first of all, we didn't target the press. We targeted the equipment that was on the building that was Hamas's equipment that used for propaganda for the civilians. We didn't hurt the building and we didn't hurt the press. So you cannot say that we targeted the press. Believe me, we don't target press. And if you want, I can even send you the video of this attack that only the antennas on the building were hurt. Then, yes, I did send a letter with no any connection to that accident to Moscow to say that I think that your coverage of this conflict, of this operation, was very, very one-sided, because we see how you show the casualties in Gaza, but you don't show casualties in Israel. We see how you speaking about the force that about our force, about our operation, but you don't speak about our need to use this force in order to just stop the rockets. That's what I wrote, and I really, really hope that your channel will see the Israeli casualties, the Israeli pain of 12 years. 12 years our cities were bombed under rocket attack, and for the first time we use our force very, very surgically targeting terrorists, and then you come and say that we cannot use force because we cannot have any right to defend ourselves. 2,000 years Jews didn't have any force to defend themselves, and they were, not wanted in any place on earth. And we remember what was 60 years ago in Europe. So at the end, we have a little piece of land, and yet people don't let us live, just to work and to have high-tech what we do very well. And they fire rockets on us and act with terror. So we do have army now, and we do have force to pretend to provide safety, life for our children, and we will do so as every normal state, the United States, Russia, and every state in Europe would do, as every father and every mother would do.
Well, Alex, first of all, we have talked about the Israelis who died. We just said there were 6 Israelis who died, but I mean, the proportionality is so extreme. And you just said that you didn't target this building, you just targeted something on top. I mean, IDF spokesperson Avita Lebovich even admitted, quote, "We obviously knew there were journalists in the building. We were just showing, as you were talking, extensive damage to the media house, the journalist tower. One person's leg was actually blown off. 8 people injured." So to say that no people were injured in that attack is completely erroneous. But you're talking about using force, Alex. I mean, the proportionality is just so extreme. It's just, 166 Palestinians dead. But let's talk about Palestinian statehood, which is coming up a bid once again this year. Why, when you say that all you guys want is peace and you don't want to harm anyone, why is there such aggressive rhetoric coming from high-level cabinet officials within the Israeli administration? Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman suggested that you guys will topple Abba's government if the international community votes to recognize Palestine as a state. And then he also said that he wants to bomb Gaza back to the Middle Ages.
I want to remind you something. I want to remind you something. We left Gaza 7 years ago. 7 years ago. There is no Israeli control on Gaza. There is no Israeli troops in Gaza. So why the people of Gaza, instead of firing rockets, would not build schools and gardens and theaters and cinemas? Why they put all this money and all this effort on firing rockets? We left Gaza. There is no invasion in Gaza for 7 years. We already declared several times, more than once, this prime minister, that we do accept Palestinian state. But Palestinians doesn't accept that our state is a Jewish state, and they don't want to provide the security that we need. We need to be a Jewish state, a homeland for Jews, a secure homeland for Jews. We left Gaza. We left Gaza, and yet we have terror from Gaza. So what do you want us to do? Not to use force back to enforce them, not to fire rockets? Unfortunately, we have it. Unfortunately, I repeat. Now, we didn't target the building. We targeted the antennas on the building, and we didn't want to target the journalists, believe me. And if you really want all this violence to stop, please go to Hamas and tell them to build a state, to build schools, and to build good life for their people in Gaza. Believe me, I will come and volunteer for that instead of firing rockets on us.
Well,
if
Alex,
they will fire rockets, we will respond. As simple as that.
I'm just going back. Alex, it's hard to have them build things up when you forbid construction material in there. And as we know, it's Protocol 1, Article 79 of the Geneva Convention. It is a war crime to target journalists. That letter that you sent to RT, it's a shame that you didn't apologize for, bombing. Even if it wasn't intentional, it should have been retroactively apologizing for bombing media, which is against international law. Thank you so much for your time, for giving your side of the whole conflict. Spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Alex Selsky.
I apologize if anybody was hurt. Believe me, I apologize if anybody was hurt. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, continue. Finish up your thought and yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Believe me, I do apologize for any hurt. But again, we didn't target journalists. We just wanted to target the antennas. We didn't target journalists. And again, if anybody was hurt, we apologize, and you personally are invited to come to Israel. Believe me, you will be the best guest in Israel. Come and see what we have suffered from for all these years from firing rockets. Again, we do forbid for the materials to get into Gaza that the terrorists use for weapons. Stop firing, stop doing weapons, and believe me, everything will get back. For schools, for children, believe me, Jews, most of what Jews love is family and children. Believe me, we would like to see Palestinians live very good life, but stop threatening on us and start building life. Believe me, Israel will help them.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex Selsky.